Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into some fascinating waters,
Okay.
maybe even slightly unsettling waters.
Hmm.
The impact of AI on the world of podcasting.
Right.
Specifically, we'll be focusing on a Google AI tool called NotebookLM
Uh-huh.
and why it has people talking.
Yeah.
You actually inspired this deep dive
Oh, cool.
because you were curious about AI's influence on creative industries.
It's a hot topic for sure. And this particular tool from Google is raising some big questions about the future of audio content.
Right, and to really understand what we're dealing with here, we're looking at a really insightful article from Listen Notes
Okay.
called NotebookLM, a threat to the podcasting world. Listen Notes is the leading podcast search engine,
Right.
so they're definitely on the front lines of this whole thing.
They are indeed. And what makes this article so compelling is that it doesn't just scratch the surface. It dives deep into the technical aspects of NotebookLM, the ethical implications, and the potential consequences for both podcast creators and listeners.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't tech wizards, what exactly is NotebookLM?
Imagine this. You're working on a project,
Right.
maybe doing some research, and you've got a ton of documents and web pages open.
Mm-hmm.
NotebookLM lets you feed all of that information into it, and it spits out a podcast with AI-generated hosts discussing the content.
So it's like a personal research assistant.
Yeah.
That turns your reading list into a podcast.
Exactly. And on a personal level, that could be incredibly useful. It could be a game changer for students, researchers, or anyone who wants to absorb information more efficiently.
I can see how that would be super appealing, especially for people who like to multitask.
Absolutely. But here's where things get a little bit ungoogly and a whole lot more complicated.
Okay.
Google is usually all about polished products
Yeah.
that reach a mass audience. But NotebookLM is different. It's more experimental, almost like a side project, and it targets a very specific niche, people who want to create podcasts from their research.
So why is that ungoogly?
Because it seems to contradict their efforts to combat low-quality AI-generated content. On the web, they're trying to clean up the internet, yet they're releasing a tool that makes it easier to create AI-generated podcasts.
Wait, hold on. Google is fighting AI-generated content everywhere except podcasts. That seems contradictory, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's what makes NotebookLM so fascinating. It's a window into the complexities of AI, the challenges of regulating it, and the potential unintended consequences of its development.
And the article from Listen Notes takes this even further by highlighting how NotebookLM is being used to create fake podcasts.
Yes, and that's where the alarm bells start ringing. Because if you can generate podcasts that sound like they're hosted by real people, the potential for misinformation and deception is huge.
Fake podcasts. Okay, I'm officially intrigued and a little bit creeped out. What are people's motivations for making these fake podcasts in the first place?
Well, according to the Listen Notes article, there are a few different reasons. Some people are trying to manipulate search engine rankings to drive traffic to their websites. Others are deliberately spreading misinformation or propaganda.
So basically, they're trying to game the system.
Exactly. And the scary part is how convincing these fake podcasts can be. Listen Notes discovered over 500 of these fake podcasts.
Wow, 500. So this isn't just a few isolated cases. This is a real widespread issue. Did they mention any specific examples of these fake podcasts?
They did. They actually compiled a whole list of them, which you can find on their blog. And some of the examples are truly mind-boggling. They found one about gardening that had incredibly detailed information about specific plant varieties and techniques, but it was all completely fabricated by the AI.
Seriously. So someone could be listening to a podcast about gardening and be completely misled. That's unsettling.
It is, and it highlights a phenomenon called hallucination in AI.
Hallucination. Okay, that sounds a little ominous. How does that work?
Well, think of it this way. AI models are trained on massive data sets of text and code, but sometimes they can draw connections that aren't actually there, or they can generate information that seems plausible, but is actually completely false. It's like the AI is having a very convincing delusion.
So it's not that the AI is intentionally lying. It's more like it's filling in the gaps with its own fabricated information. And it can do that in a way that sounds very convincing to a human listener.
Precisely. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because if we can't trust the information we're hearing, then what happens to the value of podcasts as a source of knowledge and entertainment?
This is where I start to get a little worried. Because as you said, AI is getting better and better at mimicking human speech and conversation. So how do we even begin to tell the difference between a real podcast and a fake one? Especially if the AI is hallucinating all this believable-sounding information.
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that researchers and developers are grappling with right now, because as AI becomes more sophisticated, it becomes harder to detect its fingerprints.
Okay, so we've talked about how NotebookLM is a little unusual for Google, how it works, and the scary issue of AI hallucinations leading to fake podcasts. But why should all of this matter to me as a listener?
That's a great question, and it's something that the Listen Notes article explores in depth, because at the end of the day, the listener experience is what's at stake here. If your podcast feed is suddenly flooded with AI-generated content, it becomes much harder to find the high-quality human-created shows that you actually want to listen to.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And the more AI-generated content there is, the bigger that haystack becomes.
Exactly. And it's not just about the quantity of content, it's also about the quality of the listening experience.
Right, because part of the magic of podcasting
Huh.
is that human connection, that feeling that you're listening to real people sharing their stories, their expertise, their passions. And if that's replaced by AI-generated voices, it changes the whole dynamic.
Absolutely. That intimacy, that
Hmm.
sense of shared humanity, that's what makes podcasting so special. And if we
Yeah.
lose that, we lose something really valuable.
I completely agree. It's like the difference between reading a handwritten letter from a friend and receiving a mass-produced marketing email. They both convey information, but the personal touch, the human element, is what makes the letter so much more meaningful.
That's a perfect analogy. And it highlights the stakes here. Because if we allow AI-generated content to dominate the podcasting landscape, we risk losing that essential human connection that makes this medium so powerful.
This is a lot to take in. We've gone from a cool personal research tool to the potential erosion of trust in podcasting as a whole.
And we're just scratching the surface. Because the implications of NotebookLM go far beyond the individual listener experience. It also has the potential to disrupt the entire podcasting industry, from the way podcasts are created and monetized to the very future of human creativity in the digital age.
That's a great transition to our next point. The article also talks about the impact of NotebookLM on podcast creators. And I think this is where things get really personal. For a lot of people who have poured their heart and soul into building their shows,
It does get personal. Because imagine you're a podcast creator. You spend hours researching, writing, recording, editing, promoting, pouring your heart and soul into your show. And then suddenly there's this tool that allows anyone to generate a podcast with the push of a button.
yeah, that's got to feel like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between a chef who spends years honing their craft and someone who just throws a frozen dinner in the microwave.
Exactly. And it creates this very uneven playing field. How can human creators possibly compete with an AI that can churn out content 24/7 with minimal effort?
And it's not just about competition. It's also about the value we place on human creativity and originality. If listeners start to see all podcasts as interchangeable, whether they're made by humans or AI, it devalues the work of real creators.
It absolutely does. And it could lead to a vicious cycle. More AI content discourages human creators, leading to even more AI dominance. And eventually, we end up with a podcasting landscape that's bland, homogenous, and devoid of the unique perspectives and voices that make this medium so special.
It's almost like we're talking about an invasion of the podcast snatchers. These AI-generated podcasts look and sound like the real deal, but they're missing that essential human spark.
That's a great way to put it. And it brings us to another crucial point that the Listen Notes article raises, the financial implications for the podcasting industry as a whole.
Right, because at the end of the day, podcasting is a business. Creators need to make a living, and that often relies on advertising revenue.
Exactly. And if advertisers start seeing poor returns from ads placed on AI-generated podcasts because no one's really listening to them, they might pull back from the medium altogether.
That would be devastating for creators who are already struggling to make ends meet. It could undermine the entire financial infrastructure of podcasting.
Absolutely. And the ripple effects wouldn't stop there. The article also talks about the strain this puts on hosting platforms. They have to store and serve all of this AI-generated content, even if it's barely being listened to. It's a waste of resources that could be better used to support real creators.
So it's a lose-lose situation. AI-generated podcasts hurt creators, they hurt the platforms, and ultimately they hurt listeners who are looking for high-quality, human-created content.
You've summed it up perfectly. But before we spiral into complete despair, it's important to acknowledge that there are people working on solutions to these challenges.
Okay, so we haven't reached the AI apocalypse just yet. Tell me there's some hope here.
There is. The Listen Notes article, for example, calls for greater transparency and responsibility from AI developers. One idea they propose is the use of watermarks or other signals that would clearly identify AI-generated content.
So kind of like a digital label that says, warning, this podcast was made by a robot.
Exactly. And it wouldn't have to be that blunt. It could be something as simple as a tag in the podcast metadata that's invisible to listeners, but can be detected by platforms and search engines.
That seems like a pretty straightforward solution. Would that be enough to address the concerns we've been talking about?
It would be a major step in the right direction. It would allow platforms like Listen Notes to filter out AI-generated content if they choose to. And it would empower listeners to make informed decisions about what they consume.
It would also level the playing field for creators by making it clear which podcasts are human-created and which ones are AI-generated.
Precisely. And ultimately, it's about respecting the listener's right to know what they're listening to. Just like we have labeling requirements for food and other products, it makes sense to have some form of transparency for AI-generated content.
I'm totally on board with that. But even with these safeguards in place, there's still the issue of AI getting better and better at mimicking human creativity. Is there a point where we won't be able to tell the difference anymore?
That's a fascinating question, and it's one that philosophers and technologists are debating right now. Some experts believe that AI will eventually reach a point where it can create art music and literature that's indistinguishable from human-created work.
Wow, so we could be heading towards a future where the line between human and machine creativity becomes completely blurred.
It's certainly a possibility, but I think it's important to remember that even if AI can perfectly replicate the technical aspects of human creativity, there's still something fundamentally different about the human experience.
Right, because AI doesn't have emotions.
Yeah.
It doesn't have lived experiences. It doesn't have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are what infuse human creativity with meaning and depth.
Exactly. And even if an AI could technically write a song that sounds just as beautiful as a song written by a human, there's still a difference in the intention, the motivation, the emotional weight behind that creation.
So maybe the question isn't whether AI can replicate human creativity, but rather should it? And what are the ethical implications of doing so?
Those are the big questions we need to be asking ourselves right now, because the technology is developing so rapidly that we need to be thinking about these things before we're faced with a situation where the genie is already out of the bottle.
We've touched on the benefits of NotebookLM, but we've been focusing a lot on the downsides and potential threats. Is there anything good that could come from AI being used in podcasting?
That's a really important point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because it's not all doom and gloom. AI does have the potential to enhance podcasting in some really positive ways.
Okay, give me some optimism here. What kind of positive impacts are we talking about?
For example, AI could be used to improve the accessibility of podcasts for people with disabilities. Imagine an AI that can automatically generate transcripts and captions for podcasts, making them accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing.
That would be amazing. It would open up the world of podcasting to a whole new audience.
It would. And AI could also be used to personalize the listening experience. Imagine an AI that can recommend podcasts based on your specific interests, learning style, and listening habits.
That's kind of like what Spotify and Apple Music are already doing with music recommendations, right?
Mhm.
But for podcasts?
Exactly. And it could be even more sophisticated. Imagine an AI that can adjust the pace and tone of a podcast to match your preferred listening speed and style.
Wow, so it's like having a custom-tailored podcast experience. That's pretty cool.
It is, and these are just a few examples. The possibilities are endless when it comes to using AI to enhance the creative process, improve accessibility, and personalize the listening experience.
So it's not about demonizing AI or rejecting it outright. It's about finding ways to use it responsibly and ethically to ensure that it serves the needs of both creators and listeners.
I couldn't agree more. And it's about having these conversations, about engaging in thoughtful dialogue and considering all sides of the issue.
Which is exactly what we're trying to do here today on the Deep Dive.
And I commend you for tackling such a complex and challenging topic. It's not easy to navigate these uncharted waters, but it's crucial that we have these conversations.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the technical workings of NotebookLM, the potential benefits and risks of AI-generated podcasts, and the broader implications for the future of audio content and human creativity.
It's true.
It's definitely a lot to consider. And I think this is where we need to bring it back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's your listening habits, your preferences, your choices that will shape the future of podcasting.
That's so true. And that's why I'm curious to hear your thoughts on all of this. Are you excited about the potential of AI in podcasting? Are you concerned about the risks? Or
Ooh.
do you fall somewhere in between?
Right, because if you're not aware of the issues, you can't really make informed choices. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do with this deep dive, to raise awareness, to spark conversation, and to encourage critical thinking about the role of AI in our lives.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's not just about podcasting. This is a much bigger conversation about the future of creativity, the value of human connection, and our relationship with technology in general.
Absolutely, and I think the questions we've been exploring today about NotebookLM and AI-generated podcasts are really just the tip of the iceberg. We're seeing similar debates play out in other creative industries, music, art, literature, journalism, as AI becomes more sophisticated and more accessible.
It's true. And as we move forward, it's crucial that we keep asking these tough questions, that we stay informed, and that we engage in thoughtful dialogue about the ethical implications of AI.
So with that in mind, I'm going to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. As you continue your own deep dive into the world of podcasts, if you couldn't tell the difference, would you mind listening to an AI-generated podcast?
It's a question that forces us to confront our assumptions about what makes a podcast valuable. Is it the information being conveyed, the entertainment value? Or is it something more intangible, the human voice, the connection, the authenticity?
Yeah. And I think the answer to that question will vary from person to person. But it's a question worth asking ourselves. Because as AI continues to blur the lines between human and machine, it's becoming more and more important to define what makes us uniquely human.
What makes us human? That's a deep dive for another day. But for now, I want to thank you for listening to this exploration of AI and podcasting. It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope it sparked some new ideas and perspectives for you.
Me too. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to check out the Listen Notes article we've been discussing. It's got some really insightful analysis and some great resources to help you learn more about this topic.
And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your comments and questions with us on social media.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep those critical thinking gears turning.